The court of heaven has opened. The gavel of the Most High has struck, and its sound has thundered through the four corners of creation, reaching every hidden room where your name was discussed in your absence. Every accusation has been brought forward, every twisted story, concealed intention, and carefully planted lie has been placed before the throne of judgment. And now, God has issued a verdict that no human voice can overturn. Your name is booming. Open your heart before 10 seconds pass. Do not skip this message, because the direction of the next 10 years of your life could begin changing within the next 10 seconds. This is not temporary encouragement meant to make you feel better for a moment. Something has shifted. The false judgment placed over your life is losing its authority, and the name they tried to stain is being spoken with a respect they never expected. Your name is entering rooms before you do. People who once viewed you through suspicion are beginning to recognize the strength, dignity, and discipline you carried while under pressure. The person who tried to make you appear small unintentionally drew attention toward you. They created a story to destroy your credibility, but that story made people watch more closely. And once they watched, they did not see the unstable person they had been warned about. They saw someone who continued working, growing, and standing with integrity, while others were waiting for a collapse that never came. Chosen one. This is greater than the recovery of your reputation. God is releasing you from the exhausting position of having to defend yourself before people who had already decided to misunderstand you. You do not need to chase every rumor or knock on every closed door carrying an explanation. Heaven is correcting the record through the evidence of your life. The pressure meant to humiliate you has revealed your character. The stones intended to bury you are becoming the foundation beneath your next season. But to understand why your name is rising now, you must return to where the battle truly began, not with a public confrontation, but with a whisper spoken by someone you trusted. Before we go there, leave this declaration below 999. My name has been restored. Let it mark the moment you stopped carrying an identity created by someone else's bitterness. And stay connected to this channel, because the messages ahead are for those who have been tested in silence, but are now being called forward by God. Share this with one person who has been forced to carry a lie they never created. Their restoration may begin the moment they hear it. The battle against your name did not begin in public. There was no open accusation, no direct confrontation, no moment where you were given the chance to answer. It began quietly, inside conversations you were never invited into. Someone who once had access to your life began using that access against you. They knew enough about your history, your relationships, and the places where you were most vulnerable to make their version of the story sound believable. That was what made it dangerous. They did not need to invent everything. They only needed to take pieces of the truth, remove the context, twist the intention, and place those fragments into the minds of people who mattered to you. They spoke carefully at first. A small comment here, a doubtful expression there. I'm just saying, something seems different about them. I don't know if they can be trusted anymore. The words were designed to sound harmless, almost concerned, because open hatred would have exposed them too quickly. They wanted to appear calm while quietly planting suspicion. They wanted others to arrive at a negative conclusion without realizing who had guided them there. You felt the damage before you understood its source. A room that once felt warm suddenly felt guarded. People who used to speak freely became distant. Messages took longer to receive a reply. Invitations stopped arriving. Eyes shifted when you entered, and conversations changed direction. Nothing was obvious enough to confront, yet everything felt different. You were carrying the weight of a verdict you had never heard, defending yourself against charges no one had spoken to your face. That period was not small. It reached into your peace, your confidence, and even your ability to trust your own instincts. You questioned whether you were imagining the distance, You replayed conversations, searching for the moment everything changed. But the attack was not created because you had become weak. It was created because the person behind it could no longer control how others might see you once you stepped fully into what God had placed on your life. They could not remove the gift, the calling, or the authority within you. So they tried to poison your name before your next door opened. What they did not understand was that a lie may enter a room quickly, but it cannot survive forever beside a life that remains consistent. They were attempting to rewrite your identity before people had time to witness the truth for themselves. Yet while they believed heaven was silent, every hidden word was already being recorded. And that is where the story becomes far more serious, because what you could not prove, God had already seen. Some wounds leave no visible mark. They settle behind the eyes, tighten the chest, and follow you into places where you are expected to smile as though nothing has happened. That was the cruel weight of this season. You were not fighting an enemy who stood in front of you. You were living beneath the consequences of conversations you had never heard, trying to understand why familiar faces no longer felt familiar. There was no single moment you could point to, no clear accusation you could answer. Only the slow realization that someone had changed the atmosphere around your name. It placed you in an impossible position. Had you confronted everyone, they would have called you defensive. Had you shown anger, they would have taken your pain and presented it as proof. Had you explained every detail, they would have accused you of trying too hard to control the story. So you carried questions no one offered to answer. You went home after ordinary conversations and replayed every word. You wondered whether your instincts were warning you or whether exhaustion had begun distorting your judgment. There were nights when the silence felt heavier than the accusation itself. Because at least an accusation can be faced. A whisper hides behind smiles, but God was not absent from those hidden places. He heard what was said after you left. He saw who exaggerated, who remained silent, who added details, and who enjoyed watching your name become a subject of suspicion. Nothing disappeared simply because it happened beyond your reach. Heaven did not require you to collect every piece of evidence. The truth was never dependent upon your ability to prove it. Scripture declares, "No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn." Isaiah 5:4-1-7. She. Notice what the promise does not say. It does not say no weapon will ever be formed. It does not say no tongue will ever rise. It says the weapon will fail in its purpose. The words may travel, but they will not own your future. The accusation may delay understanding, but it cannot rewrite what God has spoken over your life. What felt like divine silence was not neglect. It was restraint. God was allowing time to expose what argument could never uncover. He was letting patterns emerge. Contradictions surface, and hidden motives reveal themselves without requiring you to become consumed by the fight. You thought nothing was happening because there was no immediate public correction. Yet, beneath the surface, credibility was shifting. People were beginning to notice who remained steady and who could not stop feeding the conflict. Have you ever entered a room and felt the coldness before anyone said a word? Have you ever known you were being judged by a story you were never allowed to hear? If you walked through that season without surrendering your identity, right below I stayed standing. Let that declaration honor the version of you who survived what no one else fully understood. Because the next revelation is this: while you were wondering whether they believed the lie, they had already begun questioning the person who kept repeating it. Their mistake was not simply that they lied. Their mistake was believing repetition could replace truth. They thought that if your name was spoken with enough suspicion, if the same accusation was carried from one conversation to another, people would eventually stop asking for evidence. For a while, it may have appeared to work. Doubt entered places where trust once lived. Familiar relationships became uncertain. Some people stepped back. not because they knew anything, but because fear is easier than discernment, and the person behind it mistook that temporary confusion for victory, so they kept going. They added new details whenever the old story began losing power. They raised their voice when questions appeared. They became more dramatic, more urgent, more determined to keep everyone emotionally trapped inside the version of you they had created. But every exaggeration became a crack. Every contradiction left a mark. Every attempt to keep your name under suspicion revealed how desperately they needed the lie to survive. That desperation became impossible to hide. People began noticing that you were not the one keeping the conflict alive. You were not entering rooms demanding loyalty. You were not recruiting allies or creating fresh accusations. Your life continued moving while theirs remained chained to your name. And slowly, the question shifted. It was no longer, "What did you do?" It became, "Why can this person not stop talking about you?" That question was devastating because once it entered the room, their credibility began collapsing from within. Former supporters became uncomfortable. People who had once listened with interest started recognizing obsession. The concern they performed began looking like hatred. The certainty they displayed began looking like fear. They had wanted everyone to examine your character, but instead, their behavior became the evidence no one could ignore. This was no longer gossip. It was self-exposure. They believed they were building a case strong enough to isolate you. Yet, conversation by conversation, they were revealing the instability, bitterness, and hidden motive behind the entire attack. They had placed your name on trial, but without realizing it, they had taken the witness stand against themselves. And the most serious part is this: once people see manipulation clearly, they cannot return to innocence. The mask may be adjusted, the story may be rewritten, but the damage to credibility has already begun. What they called control was becoming collapse. And now, the silence they once mocked in you is about to be recognized as the authority they could never imitate. There comes a moment when silence stops looking like absence and begins to reveal power. You reached that moment without announcing it. You did not gather an audience to explain your pain. You did not turn private wounds into public weapons. You had every reason to expose them, every opportunity to answer, every human right to defend yourself with the same intensity they used against you. Yet something deeper restrained you. Not fear, not weakness, discernment. You understood that some battles are designed to pull you out of character. They wanted a reaction they could replay, a sentence they could remove from context, an angry moment they could present as proof. They needed you to become the person they had described because their story could not survive beside your consistency. So when you refused to perform for their accusation, their entire strategy began starving. Your silence was not empty. It was full of discipline. It held the words you could have used to destroy them. It carried the truth you did not need to force into every room. It protected the part of you that bitterness wanted to corrupt. While they spent their strength maintaining a false narrative, you spent yours rebuilding what the attack had shaken. You returned to your work. You guarded your mind. You learned who could be trusted. You allowed pain to deepen you without allowing it to define you. And that is what people began to respect. They did not merely see someone who stayed quiet. They saw someone who could have gone to war and still chose peace. They saw restraint where others expected revenge. They saw dignity where humiliation had been intended. Your life became the answer they were waiting for. The way you continued to treat people, the way you carried responsibility, the way you remained steady when no one would have blamed you for breaking these things. You spoke with a force no argument could match. Scripture says, "A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold." Proverbs 2:1. GOG TV. A good name is not manufactured in a single moment. It is formed slowly. Through choices no one applauds. Through restraint no one fully understands. through integrity maintained when compromise would have been easier. That is why their words could create confusion. But they could not erase the foundation beneath your name. They tried to create a storm around you. Yet the storm did not hide your light. It exposed how firmly you had been built. The darker the atmosphere became, the more visible your steadiness appeared. The more they pushed, the clearer the contrast became. They were fighting to control perception. You were becoming undeniable. Can you see it now? Your silence was not surrender. It was evidence that your identity no longer depended on being understood by everyone. If you refused to become what they accused you of being, declare below, my light did not go out. Because God was not only protecting your name, He was turning the very attack against you into the platform for your next elevation. What they intended as a burial became an elevation. The very words designed to close doors began opening eyes. People who had never paid attention to your life started watching more closely because of the noise surrounding your name. They came expecting to find the person they had been warned about. But what they discovered disturbed the entire story. They saw discipline where they had been promised disorder. They saw compassion where they had been told there was cruelty. They saw someone wounded, yet unwilling to become poisonous. The accusation brought them near, but your character made them stay. Without realizing it, the person who opposed you constructed the stage on which the truth would be revealed. They gathered the audience. They directed attention toward your life. They repeated your name until people became curious enough to look for themselves. Yet once the curtain lifted, the performance they had prepared collapsed. You did not resemble the villain in their story. You looked like someone who had endured a private war and still refused to lose the sacred part of yourself. That is why this reversal is more serious than simple vindication. God did not merely stop the attack. He entered the place meant for your destruction and changed its purpose. The pressure trained your discernment. The betrayal exposed false loyalty. The isolation separated those who loved your presence from those who respected your calling. Every stone thrown at you was gathered, placed beneath your feet, and transformed into another step toward the place you were being prepared to occupy. Joseph knew this kind of reversal. His own brothers stripped him of his robe, threw him into a pit, and sold him into a future that looked nothing like the promise over his life. Years later, standing in authority before the very people who tried to erase him, he declared, "But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good." Genesis 5:0-20. EKV. Their intentions were real. The pain was real. The injustice was real, but none of it was powerful enough to cancel what God had already established. The same hand is turning your story now. What was meant to disqualify you is becoming proof that you can carry greater responsibility. What was meant to make people distrust you is revealing how trustworthy you remained under pressure. What was meant to silence your voice is giving weight to every word you will speak in the next season. You are not emerging empty-handed. You are leaving this battle with clarity, authority, endurance, and a name that has survived examination. So ask yourself this: what if the season you called a delay was actually the road God used to position you? What if the rejection protected you from entering the wrong door too early? If you can feel Him turning what hurt you into something, hoy, right below God turned it for my good. Because the person who predicted your collapse must now face the outcome they feared most. You did not merely survive. You flourished where everyone could see it. There is a particular kind of embarrassment that comes when a person is not merely proven wrong, but forced to watch the exact opposite of their prediction unfold in public. They told people you would fall apart. They were certain isolation would weaken you. Rejection would silence you. And the pressure surrounding your name would eventually expose the broken person they claimed you were. They spoke as though your future had already been decided. But then time passed and you did not become their prophecy. You became stronger. I want you to picture a woman who spent years working quietly inside a community she loved. One person, threatened by the respect she was beginning to receive. started telling others that she was selfish, difficult, and impossible to trust. Invitations disappeared. Friends became cautious. Opportunities were given to someone else. For months, she wanted to defend herself, but instead, she kept serving, kept showing up, and kept treating people with the same kindness she had always carried. Then something changed. The person spreading the accusations began attacking others in the same way. The stories became inconsistent. Former supporters started comparing experiences, and suddenly, the woman no longer needed to prove what had happened. The pattern did it for her. Years later, the very people who had once avoided her were recommending her name in rooms she had never entered. That story matters because this is how truth often wins, not with one dramatic confession, but through a pattern that becomes too clear to deny. I believe one of the hardest lessons in life is accepting that some people will understand your value only after they witness what happens when they believe the wrong person. You may never receive the apology you deserve. They may never admit how quickly they judged you or how carelessly they repeated something they did not verify. But restoration does not require their confession. Your future is not waiting for their courage. Look at what has happened. The collapse they promised never came. You became more disciplined, more discerning, and less dependent on approval. The relationships that survived became deeper. The doors that opened became more aligned with who you truly are. Every month that you continued growing made their old accusations look more dishonest. Your progress did not simply contradict them, it exposed them. And now they are watching people speak well of the name they tried to poison. They are seeing trust return. They are hearing your work acknowledged. They are discovering that removing themselves from your life did not remove God's hand from it. That is the part they never prepared for. Their embarrassment is not your revenge. Do not confuse the two. You do not need to celebrate their discomfort or return to the same cruelty that wounded you. The deepest victory is that their bitterness did not reproduce itself inside you. You escaped the trap without becoming the trap. So let me ask you directly, have you noticed people treating you differently lately? Has someone who once doubted you begun watching from a distance, speaking more carefully, or quietly returning? Share your experience below, not to reopen the wound, but to testify that time has begun revealing what your mouth never had to defend. Because heaven is no longer preparing only to clear your name. A decree of restoration is being released over your authority, your relationships, your influence, and the road opening before you now. A decree has been released over your life. And this time it is not merely about surviving what happened. It is about restoration with evidence. The season ahead will not ask you to return to the version of yourself that existed before the betrayal. That person had compassion, but not enough boundaries. That person carried faith, but still gave too much access to people who had not earned it. That person knew how to endure, but had not yet discovered the authority hidden inside endurance. God is not taking you backward. He is restoring what was attacked while leading you into a life that requires greater wisdom, stronger discernment, and a name that has already passed through fire. Your reputation is being restored first, not through forced explanations, not through dramatic confrontations. Your name will begin reaching places before your presence does. But this time it will arrive attached to respect. People who once heard only fragments will begin seeing the full pattern. Some will recognize how carelessly they judged you. Others will speak in your favor without being asked. Opportunities delayed by suspicion may return in a form greater than the one you originally lost. The doors opening now will not depend on the approval of those who tried to close them, but God is restoring more than your name. He is restoring your authority. You are no longer required to explain every decision so that other people can feel comfortable with the direction of your life. You are being released from the habit of asking permission to protect your peace. Your no will become clear. Your yes will carry intention. You will stop confusing constant availability with love. And you will no longer surrender your voice simply to avoid being misunderstood. The power returning to you is not control over others. It is the sacred ability to govern yourself without guilt. Restoration is also entering your relationships. The betrayal taught you that closeness does not always mean loyalty, and familiarity does not always mean safety. What left created an emptiness. But that emptiness will not remain barren. God is making room for people who do not need you to become smaller in order to stay near you. There is love ahead that will not punish your strength. There are friendships ahead that will not compete with your calling. There are connections coming that will recognize your heart without exploiting it. Your influence is being restored as well. The work you almost abandoned, the vision you questioned, the voice you nearly silenced, these things are being awakened again. Your pain gave weight to your words. Your restraint gave credibility to your presence. You now carry something that cannot be learned in comfort, the authority of a person who was tested publicly but remained honest privately. Scripture declares, "And he shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday." Psalm 3:7-6. GAV. Noon does not require anyone to argue that it is bright. The light becomes too clear to deny. That is the kind of vindication approaching your life. What was hidden will become visible. What was questioned will become established. What was delayed will begin moving with a speed that surprises even you. Yet a choice now stands before you. You can remain inside the old courtroom, endlessly presenting evidence to people committed to misunderstanding you. Or you can accept heaven's verdict and walk the road that has opened. One path keeps your eyes fixed on who harmed you. The other places your attention on what God is entrusting to you next. You cannot carry restored authority while still begging the past to change its testimony. So decide now, will you continue living as though you are still on trial? Or will you step forward as someone whose name has already been cleared? If you are ready to leave the old accusations behind and receive what is opening before you, write, "I choose restoration," because the restoration of your name is not the final chapter. It is the doorway into the assignment you were being prepared to carry all along. Your name was not restored so that you could spend the rest of your life proving who was wrong about you. Heaven did not bring you through betrayal, isolation, and public misunderstanding merely to return you to the place where the battle began. There is an assignment ahead that demands more of you than survival. It requires the wisdom you gained when familiar voices became unreliable, the restraint you developed when anger begged for control, and the discernment born from discovering that not everyone standing close to you was standing with you. The fire did not only expose your enemies, it exposed your old patterns. It showed you where compassion had become permission, where forgiveness had been confused with unrestricted access, and where fear of disappointing others had kept you connected to relationships that were quietly draining your purpose. You once believed protecting your peace might make you appear cold. Now you understand that boundaries are not cruelty. They are gates around what God has entrusted to you. Some people were removed because they could celebrate your comfort but not your calling. They enjoyed the version of you that was always available, always explaining, always willing to shrink so no one else felt threatened. But the road ahead cannot be walked by that version of you. The next season requires someone who no longer negotiates with manipulation, someone who can recognize false concern before it becomes control. Someone who can love deeply without abandoning themselves, and pay attention to the people who remained. They watched you move through fire without surrendering your character. They did not need a perfect explanation before offering loyalty. They did not feed on the drama or pressure you to reopen wounds for their entertainment. These are the relationships being strengthened for what comes next. God is not surrounding you with spectators. He is connecting you with people who can honor the weight of your assignment without competing with the light attached to it. What you endured also gave your voice a depth it did not have before. When you speak now, you are not speaking from theory. You know what it means to be misjudged and continue walking. You know how it feels to lose support and still obey. You can recognize the silent suffering in another person because you survived a season no one fully understood. That pain is no longer merely a scar. In the hands of God, it becomes compassion, authority, and direction. You were not tested because heaven had forgotten you. You were tested because the next room requires someone who cannot be controlled by applause, rejection, accusations, or praise. Your identity had to become stronger than public opinion before your influence could safely become greater. So do not carry the names of those who wounded you into every new conversation. Do not make your enemies the center of a future God designed around your purpose. The door is already open, but you must enter it facing forward. Because one final decision remains: will you keep revisiting the grave to prove that you survived? Or will you finally walk into the life your restored name has made possible? You have spent enough time standing before a court that God has already dismissed. You have replayed the conversations, questioned your own memory, and wondered whether the truth would ever reach the people who accepted the lie so easily. But this is where that chapter must end. Not because the wound was insignificant, and not because those responsible suddenly deserve access to you again, but because your future cannot remain chained to a case heaven has already closed. The gavel has fallen. You are not required to revisit every room where your name was mishandled. You do not need to discover who believed the rumor, who repeated it, or who now regrets remaining silent. Their private realization is not the key to your freedom. The apology may come, or it may never arrive. Either way, your life cannot be held at the door waiting for someone else to develop the courage to admit they were wrong. Your character has already testified. Your endurance has already spoken. The life you built under pressure has answered what words never could. You remained standing when collapse was expected. You kept your heart when bitterness offered you a weapon. And now, the road ahead is asking you to release the final burden, the need to be understood by everyone. Walk forward with stronger boundaries, but do not become hardened. Carry wisdom, but do not allow suspicion to rule you. Remember what happened, but refuse to make it the center of your identity. You are not the accusation. You are not the betrayal. You are not the season in which others failed to recognize your value. Your name is entering new rooms. Your voice is carrying new weight. The people assigned to your next season will not need you to beg for trust or reduce yourself to remain accepted. What God is opening now requires your attention, your courage, and your complete presence. So do not return to the grave just to prove that you survived it. Do not keep knocking on doors that heaven has replaced. Raise your head. Receive the lesson. Release the courtroom. Step through the opening before you. The court of heaven has spoken. The verdict is final. Your name is booming. And if this message met you at the exact moment you were ready to stop defending your past and begin living your restored future, leave these words below. 999, the verdict is final. Stay close to this channel, because the next message may be the confirmation someone has been praying for. Send this to the person who needs permission to walk forward without one more explanation. Father in heaven, I bring before you every person listening who has carried the weight of being misunderstood, falsely accused, rejected, or spoken about in rooms where they could not defend themselves. You saw every hidden conversation. You witnessed every moment they questioned their own worth because of words spoken by people they once trusted. Today, let that burden break. Silence every false judgment that has tried to follow their name. Remove the power of every lie that has delayed their peace, damaged their confidence, or caused others to see them through a distorted story. Let truth rise without manipulation. Let integrity speak without explanation. Bring their righteousness into the light, and allow the life they have lived in private to become the evidence no accusation can overcome. Restore what was lost. Restore their reputation, their courage, their voice, and their ability to trust again. Open the doors that were closed through misunderstanding, but keep shut every door that would lead them back into manipulation, betrayal, or confusion. Surround them with people who recognize their heart, honor their boundaries, and respect the calling you have placed upon their life. Give them the strength to walk forward without hatred. Teach them to remember the lesson without remaining trapped inside the pain. Let them release the need for every apology, every confession, and every public correction. Their freedom will not depend on the courage of those who wounded them. May the stones thrown against them become steps beneath their feet. May the season intended to bury them become the foundation of their next assignment. Let their name enter new rooms with favor, credibility, and peace. The old trial is over. The false verdict is canceled. Their future is no longer bound to what was spoken behind them. In the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.